The shortest war ever took place in and around this paradise-like island in the Indian Ocean, but can you guess how long it lasted? I'll give you a hint. It was quicker than a flight between Edinburgh and London. But just what was the briefest war in history? What caused it? Who fought in it? Who won it? And how many were injured and died? For there were a surprising number of casualties for such a fleeting conflict. Stay tuned to this week's video from History Calling to hear which battle holds the Guinness World Record as the speediest war ever. The shortest war in history was the Anglo-Zanzibar War, and it was fought between Britain and Zanzibar in 1896, though you'll have to keep watching to find out just how brief this conflict was. Zanzibar is an archipelago, meaning a series of islands, in the Indian Ocean, and is just 2,662 square kilometres in size. For context, it's barely bigger than Luxembourg, which is 2,586 kilometres square. The main island is called Unguja, which I can only hope I've pronounced correctly, though it is also referred to as simply Zanzibar, and it's what we'll be looking at today. Zanzibar is just off the coast of Tanzania, which it is now part of, though it remains semi-autonomous. But back in 1896, it was a British protectorate. This wasn't the same as a colony, but protectorates shared a lot of the features of colonial rule, the big one being that Britain exercised a great deal of control over the relevant country's affairs. As a protectorate, Zanzibar still had its own sultans, but when these men died, their replacements had to have British support in order to take the crown. The Zanzibari succession rules were not as rigid as the British crown, and the throne did not necessarily go to the eldest son of the previous sultan. Instead, adult males were preferred, even if they were brothers or nephews of the previous incumbent. In 1888, Sultan Sayyid Barghash bin Sayyid died, and his son Sayyid Khalid bin Barghash, who was born in 1874 and who I'm going to refer to as Prince Khalid going forwards because that's what he seems to have been called and it helps to differentiate him from other members of the family, did not inherit the throne. Instead, it went to his uncle, Sayyid Khalifa bin Sayyid, who was an adult. When he died in 1890, Khalid was again passed over as the crown went to his other uncle, Khalifa's brother, Sayyid Ali bin Sayyid. He was the sultan who signed off on the British protectorate, by the way. When he died in 1893, he was replaced by Hamed bin Thuwaini, though the teenage Khalid did make an attempt to take the throne for himself by trying to take control of the sultan's palace. The British Consul General, Sir Rennell Rodd, had him expelled immediately. 3 years later, at 11:40 a.m. on the 25th of August 1896, Hamed bin Thuwaini was dead too, and very unexpectedly. In fact, it was rumoured that he had been poisoned by his cousin, the now 22-year-old Prince Khalid, who proceeded to make an even more serious play for the crown than he had attempted back in 1893. Before we get to that though, if you're enjoying this content and would like to watch more from History Calling, please remember to give this video a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button with the notification bell switched on so that YouTube lets you know when I upload. You can also find me on Instagram, which is linked below for you, and on my Patreon site, where I provide bonus materials including blog entries, mini podcasts, and early access to ad-free videos. For those of you who already support me on Patreon or by making one-off donations using the thanks button underneath videos, thank you again for your generosity and kindness, which helps to make this a viable career for me. And now, let's get back to Zanzibar. Within minutes of his predecessor's death, Khalid took possession of the Sultan's harbour-side palace with a force of about 2,800 men, many of them slaves. They had some field guns given to them by the Germans, a Gatling gun, a cannon that was 200 plus years old, and not much else. They also took control of the one-ship Zanzibar Navy, that ship being the HHS Glasgow, short for His Highness's ship Glasgow, which had been built in 1878 for use as the Sultan's personal yacht. There were already 2 British ships in the harbour, the Philomel and the Thrust, and a third, the Sparrow, soon joined them. Messages were sent to the palace telling Khalid to abandon the building and disband his forces, but he refused. Instead, having had the body of Hamed bin Thuwaini buried at 2 p.m, he proclaimed himself Sultan at 2:30. It's little wonder, given the speed with which he moved, that people speculated that he had had the dead Sultan murdered. He had, after all, seized the crown literally before Hamed was cold in his grave. The British messaged London asking for instructions from the government, and a stalemate ensued whilst they awaited a response. The next morning, the 26th, the British ship Raccoon also arrived to join those already on site and to offer further military support, as did the St. George in the afternoon, which was under the command of Sir Henry Rawson. The response from London basically told those on the spot to act as they saw best. The Times newspaper reported that an ultimatum was issued to the wannabe Sultan, telling him that unless he hauls down his flag and makes complete submission by 9 a.m. the next day, his palace will be bombarded. Again, he refused. British subjects were taken on board the warships for their own protection, and the Times reported that women and children took shelter in the British consulate. Others on land locked themselves inside their homes as the clock ticked. The threat was repeated at 8:30 a.m. the next day, but still Khalid refused to capitulate. It was therefore at 9 a.m. on the 27th of August 1896 that the shortest war in history began, with the bombardment of the Sultan's palace. Though Khalid had a larger number of men, the British had vastly superior firepower, and at 9:38 it was all over. The building had been largely destroyed. The Sultan's yacht, the Glasgow, had been sunk in the harbour, though the crew were all rescued by the British and the masts remained visible above the waterline until the 1910s. 500 men lay injured or dying, all but one of them belonged to the Sultan and many of them were slaves, and Khalid himself, who had told the British 2 days earlier that he would rather die than abandon the palace, slipped out a back door, ran to the German consulate and took refuge there. His reign had lasted less than 48 hours, and that same afternoon the British installed his replacement, Hamad bin Mohammed. No one comes out of this episode looking very good. Khalid had possibly murdered his way to the throne, and it is hard to understand how he could possibly have thought that his forces, with their limited and antiquated armaments, could ever have withstood an assault from the British ships in the bay. Even if by some fluke they had, the British could have sent a larger chunk of their navy and military to take the islands back. He seems to have run away within a few minutes of hostilities beginning. Remember, the whole war only lasted 38 minutes, though just for the record, I've seen some sources say 45, leaving the men he had been using as his army, many of them slaves with no choice but to obey, to suffer and die for what amounted to an exercise in delusion, and which achieved absolutely nothing. The British reaction, on the other hand, was the epitome of overkill. Diplomacy efforts lasted only 2 days, and as I've said, many of those who were killed were slaves, with little or no vested interest in this war in the first place. There's also the obvious argument that Britain had no right to be forcing their way into another country's affairs anyway. And though Zanzibar was a protectorate rather than a colony, I have no trouble seeing its treatment by Britain as an example of the colonial mindset. Despite all that, however, I cannot decide which of the two was worse, British control or Khalid, and this is because of the issue of slavery. Britain was pushing hard to abolish slavery in its entirety in the region, and Khalid, who was a slave owner, was not. Furthermore, the following year, the British did use their puppet sultan to finally outlaw the practice of slave owning, having previously used their influence to first ban the slave trade, and we can hardly argue that these developments weren't positive. The episode therefore represents a moral quandary. Both colonialism and slavery are deeply wrong, yet only one could be abolished in this particular scenario. I'd be very interested to hear what you make of it. Do you think that the British victory was the best option, or would you rather have seen Khalid become a fully independent Sultan of Zanzibar? Let me know your thoughts below, and if you're interested in war history and would like to hear about a fantastical treasure room lost during World War II, try my video on the Amber Room next. Until next time, everyone, keep learning.